Okay, if you say so, that we don't wait anymore, so then we start. Okay. Welcome, everybody. Wherever you are on this globe, good morning, good afternoon, good evening. I want to welcome you to the first lecture and conversation of the International Dialogue Initiative, IDI, in the Psychology of Societal Conflict series. My name is Regine Scholz. I'm a group analyst from Germany, working there in private practice. And in IDI, I'm in charge for the trainings on issues of large group identity and societal conflict. Tonight, I'm given the honorable task to moderate this conversation. One organizational remark in advance: please mute your microphone during the presentations. Later in the discussion with the audience, you can unmute yourself when you want to speak. So, our inaugural guest today is Lord David Owen, who will speak about the dynamics of war today, NATO's new profile. I couldn't imagine a more
Can you come and put the volume up a bit?
Not
sure, but I'll try. Okay. Okay. Sorry, go ahead. We're just on. My wife's going to increase the volume, I hope.
Okay, I hope you can understand me. I just said that you will speak about the dynamics of war today, NATO's new profile. I couldn't imagine a more timely topic at the moment. So, welcome, Lord Owen. It would take too much time to list all your achievements. Just to give the audience a taste. In the 70s, Lord Owen served in various functions as minister for several UK governments, eventually as foreign secretary. In the early 19th, he helped together with Cyrus Vance as peace negotiator in former Yugoslavia. Moreover, he served on the Independent Commission on Disarmament and Security Issues, maybe better known to you as Palme Commission. And last but not least, he served on the Carnegie Commission on Preventing Deadly Conflict. I couldn't think of a better guest for today's discussion. And I also want to welcome Dr. Jerry Fromm, usually called Jerry, who will be Lord Owen's partner in this conversation. Dr. Fromm is the former director of the Erickson Institute of the Austin Ricks Center. He is also past president of the International Society for the Psychoanalytic Study of Organizations, ISPSO, and until last month, he was president of the International Dialogue Initiative. IDI is a loose network of around about 20 persons from different countries around the world with different professional backgrounds, for example, clinicians, former diplomats, lawyers, etc., who try to bring into fruition the ideas of Ramit Volkan, mainly the concepts of large group identity and chosen trauma, to the understanding of societal conflicts. Before I hand over the microphone to our disputants, allow me one personal remark. This event was the brainchild of IDI member Dr. Colleen Covington. She had the idea, she made the connection to Lord Owen, and she was foreseen being the moderator. And then she died in July this year. So, in a way, this event is in honor of Dr. Colleen Covington. So, and now I want to ask Dr. Fromm to start the conversation. Please, Jerry.
Okay, thank you, Regina. And thank you very much for being with us, Lord Owen. As Regina has just told us, you have a vast range of experience with and have written extensively about the dynamics of war today, which will be our topic with regard to both Ukraine and sadly now with regard to Gaza as well. Just a bit further of a frame about the IDI, our interest in the conversation, as you know, has to do with the study of the psychological aspects of societal conflict. About half of our members are trained in psychology, and my guess is about half of the audience is as well. I'm beginning to hear an echo.
Everybody mute.
So let me continue then. As I said, about half of the members of our audience are probably trained in psychology as well. So we'll be very interested in your understanding of the societal dynamics underlying these major conflicts, and also what you've learned over the years about how to work toward conflict resolution. So let's start with Russia and Ukraine. The title of your most recent book, the paperback edition of which came out in 2022, is Riddle, Mystery, and Enigma, 200 Years of British-Russia Relations. I think it's fair to say that in 2014, when mysterious, quote, green men appeared in the Donbass region of Ukraine, it seemed like Russia was, in a sense, simply biting at the edges of Ukraine. And in an area very sympathetic to Russia. But of course, in 2022, Russia's full-scale, blatantly public invasion of Ukraine had Kyiv as its first target. To ordinary people, it was shocking, and that probably includes the majority of Russian people. And in a certain way, it seemed senseless. So can we start with your thoughts about this particular riddle? What was Russia doing? What are they doing? How do you understand this?
Well, you have to go back to the first invasion and our response, which was extraordinarily weak. Indeed, I was still doing business in Russia when that first invasion took place, and I immediately set about severing all my links. I didn't believe it was possible to continue to do business with people who could behave like this. And I was amazed that the response of the European governments was to establish this dialogue between the German Chancellor and the French President directly with the Russian President. And I think this was straight out appeasement, frankly, and I think that's how it was seen by the rest of the world. And how it was interpreted in Russia. So the second invasion came as, I won't say no surprise, but put it this way, when he massed his forces on the frontier of Ukraine through in Belarus and kept telling everybody, I'm not going to invade, I just said to myself, bloody liar, every day. And I will say this, Europe kept on trying to believe that he wasn't going to. But the American position was very strong. Every day, the US briefed, he is going to invade. And of course he did. And as far as the morality of it all is, we just need to remember that there was an agreement between Russia, between the United States and Britain and France, though they supplied it separately, guaranteeing the border of Ukraine. And why did we want to guarantee it? Because we were asking the Ukraine to give up all their nuclear weapons, which they had established in their country, and either get rid of them or return them mostly through Moscow and through an enlightened US-Russian agreement that they would be destroyed and if not destroyed, maintained in proper circumstances compatible with all the different treaties. So the Ukrainians must be thinking, why did we ever give up those nuclear weapons? Why did we we persuaded?
Mm.
How did we believe these Western politicians, American presidents, British prime ministers, German chancellors? And I think there's bafflement probably amongst the people who remember and were involved in that nuclear exchange. The nuclear exchange was, of course, part of trying to reduce nuclear participation, try to get a hold on nuclear weapons, lessen them. It was in a framework, of course, of some pretty successful American, Russian nuclear reductions. But I don't think we can underrate the sheer anger amongst particularly those people who in good faith did that, and then to see themselves invaded by Russia.
Do you believe that had Ukraine kept the nuclear weapons, that would have been a deterrent to Russia?
Yes, I do.
Uh-huh.
I do think these were not unsophisticated nuclear or primitive nuclear weapons. They were weapons, of course, that had been developed in Russia, and also, of course, there were facilities in Ukraine. But I mean, after all, they had nuclear power stations. They were in that technology. And I'm sure there are many people who had thought themselves Ukrainian during the Russian nuclear program that developed them. So they had every right to feel that they were part owners of it. And, you know, the relationship between Russia and Ukraine at that time was always, of course, Russia was dominant, but Ukraine was a separate country and was recognized in the UN. When Stalin was told he was only going to get one country when they were negotiating San Francisco, they gave him Ukraine.
And what about NATO's response? I mean, in a sense, if I hear you right, you're arguing that Ukraine's giving up of nuclear weapons was, in a sense, in partnership with NATO.
Oh, I'm not so sure it was NATO, to be honest. I think it was predominantly Bush and directly to Yeltsin. And I think that that was the price which Yeltsin was ready to pay to encourage the Ukrainians to give up. After all, we have to remember that it was Yeltsin who came to power effectively stopping the Russian government, as it then was a bit weaker and weaker, from establishing a sort of all-Russian grouping. Yeltsin wanted to be only Russia. He didn't want to take on the CIS countries. And that, of course, now is looked on by Putin as a great crime. But Yeltsin was a realist, and he just wanted Russia, and he wanted a separate Ukraine and a separate Belarus. And it was that agreement which all three presidents signed, which ended really the Greater Russia and the whole of the Soviet Empire. And of course, now we see Putin and who knows how many, I'm really not sure about this, but certainly some of his acolytes, believing that they can restore the Greater Russia that was defeated and effectively allowed to emerge as Russia on its old and recognized really boundaries, but not going out into this great empire, and they want it back. It's as if they are not prepared to accept the whole path of history that followed the fall of the Berlin Wall.
Yeah, it's a very interesting observation about Boris Yeltsin. In contrast to the word you're using about empire, I do wonder about the empire mindset in Russia, as opposed to a national mindset that respects borders. What do you think about that? Is that a historical tradition in Russia that's still going on today?
I think it certainly Putin considers the old USSR as his objective to return to their borders, and considers it was a disgrace that it was given up and has made it openly clear. I mean, fairly soon after coming into power, he made it quite clear that he thought this was a terrible blow to Russia's prestige and feelings about itself and history, that Yeltsin contrived to call Russia such a small power, that it was an imperial power, and he wanted it back.
Yeah, yeah. And how do you view NATO's response, and are you worried about the stance of NATO given the upcoming election?
And
Sorry?
that, I think, is very, very interesting, and in some sense is novel. We interpreted a defensive alliance, which NATO is, as being able to supply weaponry to a country which we considered friendly and who they wanted to support in a situation in which they've been invaded. But we are not part of this war. NATO is not at war with Russia. Now, that was a very new interpretation, and it has been broadly successful. My only plea to the NATO leaders, and above all, of course, to President Biden, is that there's no attempt to go back on that and acquiesce in the Russian invasion being successful. It's a very delicate question about how do you bring wars to an end. Unfortunately, I've had too much experience of that for my own health and good, but compromise is part of it. You've got to face it, and it's very rarely where people are engaged in battle that you can get a settlement unless both sides or all the different warring parties prefer to compromise. So I'm not in a situation where I would encourage the Ukrainians to say we'll never talk. I do hope.
To say, I'm sorry, to say what?
I wouldn't encourage the Ukrainians in the belief they should never talk, but I do take the view that it is not our job, since we are not combatants, we are facilitators, helpers, to start telling the Ukrainians what to do, certainly not publicly. I should add, I'm a prejudiced party. I mean, we have a house in the country and we have a small little cottage attached to it, well, semi in the garden. And we've had Ukrainians staying there and ever since the war. And so I'm not neutral on this or involved, but strangely, I do hold the view that the Ukrainians must be trusted to make the right adjustments. But I'm not prepared to give them a belief that they or anyone involved in such a serious war as this has the right to call for no negotiations, no compromise, no changes of boundaries.
It must be a difficult line to walk in terms of compromise versus appeasement.
It is that. I quite agree. But I think once you take up arms, you've shown you're not compromising. You're going into a different end game, if you like. You're not leaving it to the politicians. After all, the Minsk talks went on for a long time. And Chancellor Merkel largely led it, though the French president, Hollande, was there initially, and then later. It was just between the Germans and the French and the Ukrainians and Russians.
Yeah. And
they made a little bit of progress, but it was very difficult. And you have to understand that a country like Ukraine that had sort of won back its freedoms fairly recently and its new boundaries back in the Yeltsin, to accept any incursion on their territory. I understand it. And if you're mobilizing people for war and fighting back, you don't tell them, oh, by the way, on at a single point, I'm going to start giving off some of this territory.
Yeah.
So the president of Ukraine, who I think has won worldwide admiration for his courage and his fluency and his imagination, is in a difficult position, but he's not in an impossible position, and he's in a position which many, many people have been in before. And so let's stop this nonsense of talking that Ukraine must not discuss its boundaries and must not make any compromises. I would urge them, as I say, rather situ voce. I don't intend to go publicly telling them what to do. But in this conversation framework here of how you negotiate, how you deal with societal wars, you have to put on the table that there's going to be some compromise considered.
Yeah. You know, from the angle of large group identity, it's very interesting to think about how this war has challenged identities in various parts of the region. I think, for example, of Germany taking up arms now, or of Finland and Sweden in terms of NATO, and the Ukrainians' sort of effort to shape an identity beyond the history of corruption that's been in that government.
Yes, I think you raised some pretty big issues, and I agree with all of them, in fact. But I mean, just take them one by one.
Yeah.
Finland has made a very brave decision, and because they had managed Finlandization fairly well, and they also have quite effective forces. They were giving up a philosophy in joining NATO, which arguably had worked. And it's been very interesting to question, why did they? And I think they began to realize that you couldn't trust a single word that Putin said, and that there was no longer that type of relationship open to them. Now, we have to remember, they're not yet members of NATO. At the moment, block is being imposed on them by Turkey. And the same applies to Sweden. So we are in a situation where Sweden is in a serious dialogue with Turkey about them having, in the eyes of Erdogan, held terrorists, people who would like to go and back to Turkey and create trouble. And there is some truth in those allegations. We've got to hear about that. But is he blocking for other reasons, or is he genuinely having a negotiation? I hope he's genuinely having a negotiation. But I must say, I think that Finland ought to be authorized and get through straight away. This will be a big addition to NATO. I mean, Estonia, Latvia, and Lithuania, the three Baltic states, are very vulnerable. They're small, they're not that wealthy, they have got their own forces, but they are very vulnerable. And it's not an accident that, for instance, Britain has been for quite a long time now put soldiers and weapons, and other NATO countries, but Britain has done it, of course, quite a long way away. And it's done it because it is worried about the Baltic states. I'd like to give you a little bit of history about the Baltic states. When I went to Russia for the first time as Foreign Secretary in 1977, I arrived to not know quite what our relations were going to be like, because we kicked out 7 years before over 100 diplomats, so-called Russian spies, effectively, and relations had been very bad. Anyhow, as I walked down the steps, there was Gromyko. I was surprised, and it was generous of him to come out, and I drove in with his car. And I've been having difficulties with him in the neutral and balanced force reductions. And as we were going in, he pointed out to these two girders in a cross like this in the outskirts of the suburbs of Moscow. Some of your people who've been to Moscow may remember it or recognize it. And he said to me, I know, Dr. Owen, you're fed up with me for it's you see it blocking the neutral and balanced force reduction. But you've got to remember that that's where the German panzers were. And I lived through the situation being told by Stalin we had to break up our factories and transport them out and we were getting ready to evacuate Russia. I only mention this, but I think that is deep, deep in the history of all these dialogues. But coming back to the question of the Baltic states, when we got into discussions, and the president was there as well, although he was not very well at the time, and most of the talking was done by Gromyko, both of them said that they felt, I'm not sure they used the word betrayed, but that was definitely the impression they gave, that they had been betrayed in signing the Helsinki Final Act, that they believed that the signatories to that, it all accepted that the three Baltic states were now part of Russia, and that this was an issue which was removed. In fact, in a more sort of private setting, Gromyko gave me the strong, I think, wording really, it's an impression is slightly wrapped up, but he said that I personally was betrayed. I would not have been able to persuade the president and others in the Politburo to accept the Helsinki Final Act if it had not been that I was able to tell them that these three Baltic states would now be accepted by the Western world as part of Russia. Mm. I don't agree with that. And I was given a very comprehensive briefing by the Foreign Office, and I produced all the arguments, and I actually believe them to be correct. But I have to say, believed that this was not for show. Gromyko actually did believe that we were true. Mm-hmm. For that reason, this issue of the Baltic states is always there, and I think they know it, and that's why they are so worried. And I think the Germans have grown to understand it. It's a very, very sensitive issue, and it could blow up at any time.
Yeah. Well, I wanted to ask you about Vladimir Putin as, in a sense, the psychology of his leadership. You've written extensively about what you call the Hubris Syndrome. And one of your papers has the wonderful title, paraphrased from the Marriage Covenant, In Sickness and in Power. It's a wonderful title. And I wonder if you would tell us something about the Hubris Syndrome and its possible role in Vladimir Putin's invasion of Ukraine. I mean, the story you just told us about the corridor through which the Germans came reminds me that the early history of Putin. He's the youngest of three sons. The first son died in infancy. The second son died at age 2 during the siege of Leningrad, of diphtheria and also of starvation. 10 years later, Vladimir comes along. And I do wonder about the family trauma, the historical trauma of World War II in shaping his, perhaps, I mean, you've used the phrase, he's on a spiritual mission. Is he really on a spiritual mission? And does it have to do with this part of his family's history? He wrote his autobiography, which was, of course, ghostwritten with someone, is titled First Person. And it's striking that he is the first person to survive in his generation and his family.
Well, it's very hard to understand Putin. I have met him, shaken his hand when he came to London, when he was staying in Buckingham Palace. And I was then in business in Russia. And I was the chairman of Yukos, the international. And Yukos was then the biggest oil company and the richest in Russia. I'll give you as a mood example. He was there in Buckingham Palace, and we were there at a reception. And sometimes when you're in a big group, you get a feeling somebody's coming towards you. They're weaving their way across the room. And a socking great guy comes along, and he puts his finger out and he pushes it at my chest, and he says, "Are you Lord Owen?" And I said, "Yes." "You tell Khodorkovsky to get out of politics." Now, Khodorkovsky at that time was the chairman of Yukos. I looked him up immediately, and I left the reception to find out who he was. First, he was obviously close to Putin, otherwise he wouldn't have been staying back in the palace. He turned out to be the head of the Leningrad region. They still call it Leningrad region, even though it's surrounded by the town changed the next name, but St. Petersburg. But that was a sign of the sort of force. Then we watched, quite soon after Putin comes in, this huge struggle to get rid of this very interesting figure who ran Yukos extremely successfully, completely colorblind as to whether they were Russian technicians or Americans. If they were the best ones, he'd buy the Americans and buy anybody, who was not. And there was a long struggle, which was for power. I discovered when I went to see Khodorkovsky and told him this message, in fact, sent him ahead of me. And he made it quite clear to me that he was not going to stay out of politics. He wanted to be president. And he had an elaborate idea that a prisoner awaiting trial could effectively, in their system, stand as a candidate for president. And he said, look at me, I'm rich, I'm powerful, and I need to be a martyr. He was setting it up. And politics in Russia is so hard to follow. You see these groupings. At that time, Putin didn't feel, he promptly arrested him incidentally, once it became clear he wasn't going to take any notice of the warning that I'd given him. But the struggle went on. They're not in the sense after their lives, when they have these great battles, they're after getting them out of Russia. If Khodorkovsky had wanted to go out of Russia, he could have gone straight away. He didn't need to spend his time. He spent his time, and at least he didn't have tuberculosis or AIDS, but a prison on the borders right out in Siberia. At any time he could have given it up. But he proudly knew that you never carry weight in Russia, and that's what Lenin knew. You have to be in Russia. And they knew, they don't. He's now in London and elsewhere in Britain. He eventually did cave in. There was a compromise made, but I mean, he basically agreed to leave Russia, and then they were fine. So they're not even always after people's lives. Some of the people that threaten them most, they don't mind them living, but they don't want them in Russia. And this is a mind frame that's quite hard to get used to. And I think one has to study Putin. He's definitely changed in power. There's no doubt about that. I mean, the person who knows him extremely well is Kissinger. I mean, he's seen him, well over 13 times. Uh-huh. And there's mutual respect too. I mean, like the way Kissinger talks about him. And other people I know who talk to Putin over a period of time are very rarely derogatory about him. They've got serious questions about his values, judgments, and his ruthlessness and things like that. But then again, the other thing to remember about Putin, when you were asking about it, he gave up power. And he didn't stand. And he allowed Medvedev to be president for 4 years. Medvedev, incidentally, on his committee now, is the one who constantly, publicly demands that Russia should use nuclear weapons against Ukraine. But it's an interesting subject. Why did he give up power? Was he purely and simply wanting a holiday for 4 years? Or what was behind it? And now, we can't imagine him giving up power, but maybe he could. Is it impossible? I would say to you, I think Putin's hold on power is nowhere near what it was. I mean, he's not a success any longer. He handled rather skillfully, his cook, in inverted commas, who was running this really army within an army. On the road to Moscow, he always said to the cook that he respected Putin. He was not after Putin, but Putin called it a mutiny. And he he shot down his men, Putin's army, the proper army, and killed some people on the road to Moscow. And then he moved very cautiously. About this Belarusian president offering the harbor for these rebels, effectively. He led all this road. He appeared to be almost humiliated. He took his time, persuaded them that they were now back in the fold, went off to Africa, and they flew back in. And then he got rid of their plane and then. This is a captivating man, and we have to be very careful in how we handle him and think about him. So I come back, I've been a long time without coming to your real question on hubris. There is some hubris in him. Hubris comes from really what Lord Acton said many, many years ago. Power corrupts. All power corrupts absolutely. And when I started to write and think about it, I had to choose a word. Pride, arrogance, all these things. None of it was quite right. And I had to go to the Greek word, hubris. And I liked it because, you know, by far the biggest category of people who have hubris in our world, particularly we in the Western world, are business leaders. I mean, political leaders, there's very small numbers in comparison with political leaders. And you see it written large in American business, and it's often there the prelude to collapse and shareholders losing a lot of money and quite disruptive effects. And it goes to their head power. And people know it. The people on the street understand it. They live with it. You know, people who are not very privileged get to spot it in the head teacher or hospital consultant or when they're in the army, a mere major or colonel. And it's definitely them. And the question is how much damage it does. And I think it's also treatable. And increasingly, the work that's been done by neuroscientists. I used to be a neuroscientist, and we did actually work on dopamine with a very brilliant person who I got into politics. But they are now pretty close to thinking there is a neuroscientific explanation for hubris, and it's connected with being tired, working under great stress, and depletion of a neurotransmitter called serotonin.
Yes, you talk about brain distortion in some of your writings. Yeah. Well, I wonder if you could. I'm sorry.
I didn't catch the second word.
You have this wonderful quote where you talk about democracy has been invented over centuries to try to prevent brain distorted leaders from leading their people into chaos. It's a wonderful quote. So your neurological background comes through in a lot of your writings there.
Always been a doctor. I don't have a little bit.
I wonder, could we shift gears now and turn to the events, the terrible events in Gaza and Israel? You were the first British Foreign Secretary to visit Israel, as I understand it, in the 30 years after 1948 and the end of the mandate. So from that long historical perspective, what can you tell us about how you understand what's happening today? And can you imagine a way forward from this intractable and agonizing conflict?
Well, I think that you can only read this situation of Hamas's action in terms of Netanyahu. I think that Netanyahu, in his own strange way, has been on a peace mission for quite some time. And I think it stems from the agreement which actually took place under President Trump, the Abraham Accords, almost certainly put together by Trump's son-in-law, who is Jewish, a banker, and actually extremely intelligent. I've never met him, and I always wanted to meet him, actually. And so the Abraham Accords gave were two bilateral agreements, one between Bahrain and America, and one between another Arab country, Qatar. And that's important, it's Qatar, because Qatar's hands are on the whole of this issue. And Netanyahu is no fool, but no, I'm not a great admirer, but he's certainly skilled and very experienced. I think he's been working on this forum of the Abraham Accords, after all signed in front of President Trump in the White House by Israel and these two other Arab countries. And I think he was pretty close to getting Saudi Arabia involved, and then some more countries coming in. And people are more and more now exposing the fact that Netanyahu has been cooling down on military offenses, not taking his eye off the ball of the security of the country, making some strange decisions about what's happening, arranging. He's coming under great criticism. And I think that he feels very let down. And I think he has been let down. And I think Hamas' motivation for the attack on Israel was to stop the Abraham Accords and the dialogue that was developing between Netanyahu and potentially the Crown Prince of Saudi Arabia. And I think it has been a devastating blow, actually, to rational, serious choice of drawing up a new map, really, serious map, delineating the populations according to their prejudices and their commitments, and not this intermingling, which simply doesn't work. But it's certainly achieved its first objective. I would like, I must say, one of the first things to do is Israel to say that they are ready to enter into those discussions that were blocked and start a different dialogue, preferably under a different prime minister. But I have the utmost sympathy with the leaders of Israel following the nature of the assault on their country by Hamas. It was of the likes in brutality and disregard for almost any values at all, a complete disgrace. There's just no way you can justify it. I think we have to face the fact that Israel has decided that if Hamas continues, then their country may not continue. And
I'm sorry, they've decided, I'm sorry, would you say that again?
If Hamas continues with the strength that it had when it made that attack on them, unchanged and not removed, and in most cases killed, then Israel itself will come under threat. But that type of attack, unleashed on them from different parts, and at one time, many of us feared that it would coincide with the attack of Hezbollah coming in from the Lebanon, so a two-pronged attack. This is a very complicated struggle. I think, personally, President Biden, and in particular, his Secretary of State, Blinken, has played a very, very astute hand and continues to do so. Because I think they have sensed this is like no other attack that Israel's ever had. And I talk to my liberal friends. You know, my wife is a literary agent, an American, but was also the agent for Amos Oz, who's now died. Some of you may have read of his books. And he was a Peace Now candidate, hugely involved in the peace movement. And, you know, he's lived through my life for years and years, decades. And we used to stay on his kibbutz. Now, these people who are his friends are more angry with the Arabs than I've ever seen. And these are people who've made many excuses for Arab behavior and don't like Netanyahu or his groups one little bit. They'll remove him immediately. And you see that this is different from anything else we've ever seen. The Jewish people in Israel, and I think around the world, increasingly are beginning to believe that what is at stake is Israel itself.
Yeah.
They may be wrong. It's not a mind frame that I believe in, but I must say I'm closer to believing it than I have ever been before. And I think that this is why they will continue this ruthless stance. I mean, today we've heard that they are now going to have a few humanitarian corridors. I think this is because they are succeeding in tracking down Hamas and shooting them. I don't think they wait for anything else. It's not bringing these people to trial. And they will stop if there is an exchange of hostages, but they don't believe there will be, or it will be dead bodies, or they dare not risk just holding on in the hope that hostages will come back. So it's, I mean, after all the years past, the Israelis would give anything to get a soldier back. I mean, they did over this Hamas. They got rid of 90 prisoners or something, and one of whom was the present leader. So this is going to take time, and how we are going to see. I don't think Israel is going to accept another authority running northern Gaza for quite some many months, years even. I don't actually think that the Arabs who are operating in their own authority and handling it with such high skill, Abbas, after he lost the election with Hamas, I don't think he's going to be. A lot of Israelis are saying they must now run this. I don't think they have the capacity to do it.
Can you imagine any Palestinian entity, or even more broadly Arab entity, running Gaza?
I think it has to be an Arab entity. I mean, the UN, I've never been more disappointed than the UN with their actions. I can't understand it. There's no love lost between the UN and the Israelis over many years, and reports are on both sides. But I wrote to the head of the Secretary General of the UN, and I pointed out that in the former Yugoslavia, in Bosnia-Herzegovina, in 1972, when Vance was speaking for the UN and I was speaking for the EU, we did persuade the Security Council to pass a resolution that UNPROFOR would escort lorries which were being prevented, humanitarian lorries with goods which were intended mainly by the Serbs, from feeding the high-up villages which were facing a humanitarian catastrophe with winter coming and a belief that we would lose many people. They did it. The Security Council passed the resolution. The precedence is there. UNPROFOR can be created and it can escort lorries. Why the hell that wasn't done right at the start, I can't understand it. Maybe what's been agreed now will be better. Let's see, but as long as the Israelis think there are any Hamas people in northern Gaza, they'll go on fighting. They put troops in there and they're taking huge risks in having to fight in these. And now nobody can be under any illusion. There were corridors containing Hamas under hospitals. That's a fact now. It's beyond dispute. And so we're very careful now about how we use the word humanitarian values and intervention. There's got to be some intervention. And I think the Russians used to have very good relations with Putin. Putin saw Netanyahu many, many times when he was playing a big role in Syria, that he would visit Israel regularly. And of course, there are many Russians, not all mainly right-wing rich people, but there are also a lot. It's a big population. Now, all of this makes it very, very hard for us to get a settlement there. And I don't think it will be easy. I don't think it's going to be quick.
Well, I wonder, shall we?
Unless you can recover the concept behind the dialogue of establishing behind the Abraham Accords. And that's what I would go for now. I wouldn't bother about it. Israel's not going to listen very much. I would try and persuade the Saudis, if not they themselves, but Qatar to enter into discussions with the Israeli government about the wider concept of a big regional establishment. Remember, the Saudis have put forward this idea of a new industrial city, Neom, and they are putting their proposals in the context of Jordan, Egypt, Saudi Arabia, and Palestine state and Israel. And I would just go ahead and try quietly on make breakthroughs on that framework, much more likely than pursuing ceasefires and getting the Israeli army out of northern Gaza. I don't see them getting out.
Yeah. Well, shall we open this to members of the audience?
Please do. I'll
anything else you
shorter so that people can intervene.
Yeah. Okay. Well, Regina, how about would you invite people to speak?
Of course I do, because we are very curious what will come from the audience. So when you want to ask a question or make a comment, please use this raise hand function. You find it somewhere with reactions. If you have this little button on the line under all the pictures, there's a little button called reactions, and if you click on that, you see either a hand or just a thumb up. So please raise the function raise hands, and then we will collect a few questions or comments, and then from time to time going back to Lord Owen or to Jerry Fromm. It depends whom you want to ask something, so that they can react to it, and then we could collect. We make the next collection of questions and comments. Okay. Or was that too complicated? Or was it too packed? Or now this input that you got, that it's too difficult just to make up one's mind to find a question. Please don't be shy. And everybody who wants to speak, please unmute yourself. Oh, so there's some coming. Huh? Barbara Fitzgerald?
Yes, hello.
Yeah, hello.
Hello. Thank you for a very interesting discussion. I know Ukraine and Russia. I have been there many times. And I've always been struck, particularly with Russia, with some of the monuments. You know what I mean? And it makes sense to me, you know, when you said that they showed, you know, where the panzers came in. There was always stories that were told around past victories. And what strikes me when we think about Ukraine and Russia, I went to the Yeltsin Museum as well. And the Yeltsin Museum was in Ekaterinburg in Siberia. And I was very struck about the you know, Yeltsin was really celebrated in Ekaterinburg because that's where he was born. And I was very struck by, you know, knowing who Putin became. You know, there's a very strong picture of Putin sitting at the desk of Yeltsin. And he looks so small, he's like a clerk. And I just wondered about that whole thing about significances and what's significant and what is understood. Like, for example, Jerry, you talked about, you know, the difference between an empire mindset as opposed to a nationalist identity. And when do identities change? and why in a particular time in history does an identity change? What is it, when does it become an ideology or an entitlement ideology that can start, a war? And there's something very primitive in the Israeli-Palestinian conflict at the moment. When things are very primitive, I'm a psychoanalyst, so I come from that perspective. It's very hard for words to be said. It's very hard to find ways to dialogue. And yet it needs to happen. But when you, Lord Owen, when you spoke about the importance of maybe, that it needs to be at a different level. It isn't just, of course it is about, negotiating that humanitarian corridors are in place, but in terms of another level or another country, it's like the parent or a different level of authority needs to come in, particularly when things are fragmenting and when things are breaking down. And it's very hard for people to recognize that other authority, particularly when there's a lot of satisfaction out of revenge and out of hate that belongs to past histories that are starting to be reenacted. So I just found it really, it kind of put meat on the bones, in terms of some of the dynamics that are often talked about. So I'm just, like, how can we understand that these forces are now very alive in this world, where there's certain barriers and taboos that have, that have been crossed. I mean, just to make a final point, I had no idea that there, so many billions had gone into armaments, and what an industry that was behind it. It wasn't like the COVID vaccine where you're waiting for a new vaccine to come in. They were there, they were available. Billions have been spent on all of that. And like, where did all that momentum come from? I know it's about protection. And also, just the last point, nuclear bombs are talked about much more ordinarily now than they ever have, even in terms of that junior minister in Israel who talked about, well, maybe we should drop a nuclear bomb on Gaza. I mean, to say something like that and for it to be almost heard. So anyway, I'm just talking about some of the resonances in terms of what I heard from both of you. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Barbara. Julia, do you want to join in to connect to that so that we can pack these booths together? Or you want to?
Take from her intervention a very important point. I think we have to try to put ourselves in their shoes. We often need to do that in any negotiation, but particularly with the Russians. And the title of my book, of course, comes from Churchill's description of Russians. And this enigma quality is definitely there, and you've got to somehow grapple with it. And I just, for example, Yeltsin, was in a lot of pain and started to drink very heavily. And he turned up in Berlin, and he was there to mark the fact that the Russians would be able to be, had to be removed from one part of Berlin, that they were going to have a different place for their national memorial. It was a very delicate issue of this moving of the structure and everything like that. And he came completely pissed and started to conduct the orchestra and everything like that. And the reaction of the Russian people, I was there, was real anger. I mean, humiliation of Russia. They feel their history and their pride in their history and their pride in their country is deep, deep. And therefore, we have to take seriously the criticisms that come from many eminent people who have studied Russia. And you in America have had many of who have known Russia and have studied it and have been warning successive US presidents and the rest of the world that we have to be very careful in this business of encroaching NATO right up to the Russian boundary. and that they were bound to resent it, bound to fight it off, and that we had been warned by our own people. And that's, we ignored it. And our very US presidents, Bush, Clinton, knew the criticism, but still went ahead with pushing NATO membership right up to the borders of Russia. And I think you can exaggerate this argument, but it has maybe illogical, maybe unreasonable, maybe too emotional, but it has substance to it. They see themselves being encircled, and they see Russia being defined as a very much smaller country than they think it is, not only was, but is.
Thank you for that, Julia.
Good evening. I just wanted to thank you for this conversation, and I just wanted to tell you that I'm in Ukraine now. So I'm in Kiev, and I wanted to notice when Hamas attacked Israel, it was by feelings the same feelings that we have in Ukraine in the beginning of the war. Ukrainians don't hesitate to see the same cruelty of Hamas about Israelis. So I just wanted to tell that it is very important that we're talking about that, and it is important to understand that people, something is going on in the world, that people burning out so fast. The level of cruelty is higher, and this is what I'm thinking about now. Thank you.
Somebody wants to, Jerry or Lord Owen, you want to comment on that?
Well, I mean, only to echo what Lord Owen said about the way in which Hamas attack sort of kicked the situation into a different realm, a realm where atrocity was almost a new normal. And so I understand what Yulia is saying about a higher level of cruelty.
I think there's no doubt that the Arab world doesn't understand this, and it will take a lot of water will have to throw through many bridges before they have any concept of what they have unleashed here. I haven't done it personally, but you know, we know who supports Hamas. We know that behind it is Iran and money, and we know that behind it is a link with Hezbollah, and we know that they've made a calculation that seems that they're not going in. Now, we don't know what America has said to them. I mean, putting your carriers there too, and also now this big submarine with 90 cruise missiles in it. Did Biden, he said, don't. Nothing more, but a lot more has obviously passed. And have they been told quite bluntly, if you cross over, Hezbollah crosses over the border, America will come in. I like to believe he has, because I think it would be a perfectly justified use of the military might that America has, and stopping a very bad situation from getting disastrous. So I think it was, as I say, I've heard a great deal. I've watched many Americans deal with American Secretary of States in my time deal with Israel, and I think that they've all had their skills, and I think Lincoln has many of them, all in one person. I really admire it. But it will be difficult to get this issue settled. And I can see that they will call it a day over Hamas, as it is, and therefore they can take out some of their military. But the idea of just leaving Gaza, it's, I would have thought years ago. I mean, they stuck it out in Gaza for years. There was a big, long argument about whether or not they should leave Gaza. And eventually they did it. But it was never an easy decision, and all those who feared the worst have had their worst first concern. And if it's going to be a pile of rubble, it's certainly going to be now for 10 or 15 years, do you really believe that Hamas is not going to come back in some form in Gaza? Hard to believe it can be stopped. The UN won't go in anyhow. And if they went in, frankly, it would be a very, very difficult, almost impossible task.
Lord Owen, might we ask for one more question from Molly?
Yes.
Can you hear me okay?
Molly?
Yeah, it's a simple question. I was wondering, Jerry and Lord Owen, if you would speak to how what motivates a leader to talk instead of to kill, to stop, to cease fire, or someone like Putin or Netanyahu, or even leaders of Hamas to get together and talk instead of create war.
I think Putin would talk if they want to talk in Ukraine. I think he will negotiate. I think he is fighting for being on all sides of the sea, and he wants Russia to be able to export out into the Black Sea, and they don't have a very good port. That's why he took Crimea, and as long as he keeps Crimea, he's got this wish to have this road, this strip of land that would also come into the Crimea and go out through that port. So I think he is afraid of people interfering with shipping, and there aren't many other outlets. So you can see a geopolitical reason why he wants to control the access of industry. So I think he'd talk. Ukraine would have, the president will have very much difficulty. It's much easier to fight on a simple issue. We are going to force them out of every square meter of our territory. But they can read the newspapers. We can all read the newspapers. We can all make a bet on who's going to be our next president. We can see the makeup of the House of Representatives. We can see where the votes are. We can see where the calls for money are. And America's got other problems around the world, in Asia, for example, in China. So, I mean, I think that the American public is getting tired of Ukraine. We know that. That's not, I don't say it publicly, but I, of course, I can read the groups. And if I was the president of Ukraine, I would get into negotiations and fast.
Yeah. Well, Lord Owen, thank you so much for being with us. It's a pleasure talking with you.
Okay. Thank you.
And I think the rest of us will stay on for a few minutes in case there's further conversation we could have. But thank you very much.
Pleasure. Yeah. Thank you very much.
Thank you for sharing your rich experience and all your thoughts with us.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Good night. So there's another little yellow hand coming up for Anna-Christine David.
I think Anna was applauding, Regina.
Ah, okay. Wonderful.
That was a high-tech applause.
Okay. High-tech applause. So mute this applause. I'm used to just a little bit noise. Okay. So any comments? Something what we can discuss together, or everybody is tired? Monica, I would be interested of you to hear your comments to this conversation.
Well, I don't have much to say. I'm writing a book on this topic and hopefully it will be ready in a month.
Okay. Do you already have the title?
Title will be something like revisiting why war in why Russia, Ukraine, and Israel Hamas war, or something like that.
Okay. And you make me curious.
Yeah, I already wrote about 150 pages, so.
Okay, it's winter time.
Yes. Thank you.
Jerry, do you want to summarize something?
No, I'm, you know, I think the conversation speaks for itself, and you know, if anybody'd like to make a comment or open a topic for conversation, that's fine. But I don't need to add very much.
Okay, Harriet, please unmute yourself.
I was very interested in terms of this kind of overlap between diplomacy, international diplomats like Lord Owen, and with his experience and so forth, and the group dynamic, the large group, the international group issues that are raised, and Colleen Covington wrote this book recently that's wonderful on this. Just in a way to raise what was raised already by one questioner about the notion of how international groups, international societies can perform parenting functions. It's a kind of weird notion, but I think it's very interesting in view of the gaps. I was thinking particularly about the Middle East now, but in view of the need for, with all the change and flux that's coming with the American election and the escalation in Israel, Gaza, Hamas, and so forth. Just thinking, how do we think, I suppose, how do we think in longer terms about bringing negotiation to the table, about talking, as someone was really bringing up, as opposed, and negotiating as opposed to pouring more money into arms and escalating that. Just to raise that, really.
I think that's a very important thought or question, because it's if you use another terminology than this parenting, which in a way, on the other hand, implies some kind of infantilizing for parties in that, but it's a question of containment, bringing in third parties. At the moment, we only have thirds. We have the Americans, we have the EU, we have Egypt, we have Saudi Arabia, and many other countries who try somehow to contain what's happening. And we don't know where it will lead us, but and just if you just would take it on a more general note, when is that helpful and when is it not, when it makes things even more complicated? There's a very, very interesting question to think about. Yes.
If I could add to that, Regina.
Please, please.
Harriet, your question reminds me of something that Lord John Alderdice from Northern Ireland discusses in the peace process there. And it has to do with their identifying many years ago, back in the 1990s, three sets of disturbed relationships. One was within Northern Ireland between unionists and nationalists. The other was between the north of Ireland and the south of Ireland. And the third was the larger relationship of Ireland itself and Britain. And he talks about the way in which three sets of dialogues had to happen at those three levels to get something going. And this is where Regina's word containment comes in, because the further out you move, the more you're talking about a containing structure. And so, to what degree something like this makes sense to think about in Israel and Palestine is a very, very good question, I think. And I thought Lord Owen was taking us in that direction when he thought about the parties to the Abraham Accords playing a role here.
Here we have from the chat, we have a post from Laszlo, who tried to give us his question and had technical difficulties. Now he is giving it in writing. I doubt that everybody can see it, so I will read it aloud for everybody. I do uniquely see the depth of Russia or IDI. Maybe here's a typo. IDI uniquely sees the depth of Russia's losses. If a place as Hungary, where every other family has lost a relative to a loss outside of military conflict, what can be said of Russia? Many, maybe all, most families have lost relatives like immediate relatives. Biggest danger if NATO policies led by thinkers who have no idea of such depth of loss. This poses serious misunderstanding among diplomats. Don't you think so? So he's also referring to the personal history large scale traumata, how they influence the politicians to act how they act, and say, okay, this is in, if I understand it correctly, maybe somebody helps me. Says, well, if the NATO officials have not been not to go through such difficult mourning processes for personal losses, they will not understand what they are doing. Is that something that he wants to say?
Well,
can you see the text, Jerry?
Yes, yeah. I'll tell you what my thought was in response to it,
Yes.
because in a sense it's raising, as you say, the issue of trauma and mourning, mourning on a vast scale. And I was reading somewhere that in the 10 years of Russia's fight in Afghanistan, there were 15,000 deaths of soldiers. And that war came to an end for many reasons, but one of them was mothers began to protest the loss of their children. In 18 months in Ukraine, Russia has lost 10 times that many soldiers, and yet we don't see mothers protesting. And so it raises a whole bunch of questions there, including this kind of massive loss and the challenge to societal mourning.
Anybody else? Should we then close the session, not to make it too complicated?
Well, thank you, everybody, for being here. I hope you found it interesting, and thank you for your questions. It's been a pleasure to see everyone.
Yes, also from my side. So thanks to everybody. It was
Thank you
wonderful
very much.
having you here.